Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda. Kushaq, choose what really matters.
The United Nations General Assembly session is by far the biggest geopolitical theatre in the world. Heads of state from around the world take turns to prove themselves to be global leaders. They do so through their speeches that are the hallmark of UNGA. On this platform, over the years, we've seen some very powerful speeches being made, addresses that have gone to change the course of history even. How many of this year's speeches stand out? Will they make it to history books or perish with the day's newspaper? Our next report explores.
The 76th UNGA is still in progress. A diverse array of speakers from around the world are taking turns to prove themselves to be leaders.
Even human rights.
Global temperature.
Most of their speeches will not make the history books, but the remarks of some are going to make headlines for several days. Here's a look at 5 of them. With Brazil's history of offering to speak first at the UNGA, this year's Session 2 was opened by the Brazilian president. But Jair Bolsonaro's actions were the exact opposite of this year's theme, which was building resilience to recover from COVID-19. Mr. Bolsonaro arrived in New York unvaccinated, traveled through the city without masks, and enjoyed pizzas on sidewalks. What's worse, he promoted an alternative medication in his UNGA speech.
We respect the doctor-patient relationship in deciding which medication to use and its off-label use. We do not understand why many countries, together with a large part of the media, have set themselves against the initial treatment. History and science will know how to hold everyone accountable.
Biden Jr., President of the United States of America.
Next to speak was U.S. President Joe Biden. America, being the host of the UNGA, is always second to address the assembly. Biden's speech came on the heels of the debacle in Afghanistan. Naturally, he used it for damage control. Biden tried to reassure the audience.
We are not seeking a new Cold War.
That America was not looking for a new Cold War, and said that the end of the war in Afghanistan is the beginning of a new chapter.
The United States will do our part, but will be more successful and more impactful if all of our nations are working toward the full mission to which we are called. That's why more than 100 nations united again around a shared statement, and the Security Council adopted a resolution outlining how we'll support the people of Afghanistan moving forward, laying out the expectations to which we'll hold the Taliban when it comes to respecting universal human rights. We all must advocate for women, the rights of women and girls to use their full talents, to contribute economically, politically, and socially. We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank.
Next to speak was Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. His country hosted the first ever direct peace negotiations with the Taliban. Al Thani used his speech to further stress on the need to engage with the Taliban. He asked world leaders to draw a line between humanitarian aid and political differences.
We stress the importance of the international community continuing to provide support to Afghanistan at this crucial stage and to separate humanitarian aid from political differences. We also stress the importance of continuing dialogue with the Taliban, because boycotting only leads to polarization and reactions. As for dialogue, it can bring positive results.
Iran's new president, Ibrahim Raisi, dedicated most of his speech to slamming American sanctions on Iran. He called U.S. sanctions a crime against humanity. as they were not lifted even during the pandemic. He also denounced American influence in West Asia, calling upon the United States to pull out its forces from the region and allow nations like Yemen, Iraq, and Palestine to make their own decisions.
Sanctions, and especially sanctions on medicine at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, are crimes against humanity. The Holy Quran introduces the destruction of nature and mankind as a major characteristic of tyrants. The Islamic Republic of Iran proposes that any kind of sanction-induced restriction or disruption in the supply of good health and environment as to humanitarian issues be declared forbidden. The outcome of hegemonism, bloodshed, and destabilization is nothing but failure and escape. Today, America does not get to exit Iraq and Afghanistan, but is expelled. The price for this lack of wisdom by America is said by the oppressed people of Palestine, Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, and also paid by American taxpayers.
The pandemic has been a stark reminder of our mutual dependency.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa used his speech to highlight vaccine inequity. He slammed Western countries for hoarding vaccines and letting low-income countries suffer. Ramaphosa also pushed for a temporary waiver, certain intellectual property rights, established by the World Trade Organization.
It is an indictment on humanity that more than 82% of the world's vaccine doses have been acquired by wealthy countries, while less than 1% has gone to low-income countries. Unless we address this as a matter of urgency, the pandemic will last much longer and new mutations of the virus will emerge and spread.
Speeches are the hallmark of the UN General Assembly session. Throughout history, the world has listened to many of them. Some have resonated for decades. Some have even changed the course of history. How many of this year's speeches will live up to this reputation? We'll have to wait and watch. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda. Kushaq, choose what really matters.